levels of education. We just want change. We want change. We would like to wake up in the morning. We would like to get the jobs that we desire. We would like to have access to opportunities. And we are not going to wait for our governments to do it for us. We are doing it ourselves. And I think I am so proud to be Kenyan and be associated with the great thing that's happening there right now. Another thing I want to say, beyond the end femicide KE and beyond the reject finance bill, there's still discontinuity. There's still discontinuity in the movement. In what sense? Like, we go to the streets, come back, and then keep quiet. And I'll tell you the reason. Because each one and every one of us is trying to survive. We need money to survive. We need funds to survive. And that's why you find out when we were done with the campaigns, some people were bought off with money. So my call to action is that if you have an opportunity to invest in a young mind, especially in the global south, please invest in us, because we would love to keep fighting for what's rightfully ours, but we don't want to put money into the equation. Like, please give us an opportunity to keep living our lives and also participate in the movement for change. That's my call to action, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A bigger round of applause. Earlier this year, I spent some time with the Polycom girls, and they're doing some fantastic work. And I think all strength to you in power. This is what enabling young girls from very marginalized households and from very marginalized areas to actually come here and speak at the UN. This is what our dream is. So how many of you have come here for the first time? Oh, there are quite a few. So I'll say a little bit about what GCAP is, just to bring you up to speed. In September 2003, prominent activists on women and children's issues, Gracia Mahel, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, hosted a group of Southern civil society activists in Maputo, Mozambique. And that is where the idea of the global call to action against poverty was first discussed. And later, this was launched in 2005 at the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre with the symbol of the white band. GCAP has mobilized hundreds of millions of people and co-organized the world's largest single issue-based campaign to stand up against poverty. It has played a key role in the Agenda 2030, and that's why we are here, that the main aspect of GCAP is to end poverty. And they have been, since the last few years, GCAP has been organizing the People's Assembly to say that we cannot talk about SDGs without the people, right? We need the people at the center of SDGs. And I don't think we can be here without some slogans. Do you agree with me or not? So let's put some energy into this room. I think half of you are sleeping. So what do we want? When do we want it? They can't hear you. What do you want? When do you want it? What do you want? When do you want it? What do we want? Gender justice, yeah? Okay. What do you want? When do you want it? Come on, you can be louder, right? You all had coffee. There's a lot of coffee there, so you can pick up some coffee. What do you want? When do you want it? Okay, so I'm going to have a competition. We'll see, is it this side who's louder or this side, yeah? You can join either sides. What do you want? What do you want? When do you want it? Can you be louder? You think so? What do you want? When do you want it? Yeah. Okay. Wherever, everywhere we go, people want to know, right, who we are. So I say, everywhere we go, people want to know who we are. We are women, we are trans, we are Dalits, we are Kilambolas, we are indigenous, we are LGBTQI, we are persons with disability. There's a long list. So let's try. Shall we try? Okay. Everywhere we go, people want to know who we are. We are. We are. We are. We are. We are. Okay. There's another one here. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Gaza war has to go. Shall we say that? Okay, we are all for peace and not war, yeah? Hey, hey, ho, ho. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Okay, so we'll try a different end. Sudan war, all wars. Okay, let's say all wars have to go, yeah? Okay. So we'll start first slowly. We'll whisper and then we'll increase the tempo, yeah? You with me? All who are sleeping, you with me? Okay. Hey, hey, ho, ho. All wars have to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. All wars have to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. All wars have to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. All wars have to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. All wars have to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. All wars have to go. Anyone wants any leaders to go? Any dictators to go? Any names? Who? Uto. Okay, so shall we say, hey, hey, ho, ho, Uto has to go. Am I pronounced? Okay. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Uto has to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Uto has to go. Anyone else? Any other leaders? Netanyahu. Okay, okay, Netanyahu, and then we go to Putin, yeah? And some leaders should not come, like Trump, you mean? Okay. We're saying Netanyahu, yeah? Hey, hey, ho, ho. Netanyahu has to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Netanyahu has to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Netanyahu has to go. Who's the next? Putin. Okay. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Putin has to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Putin has to go. Okay, this can't be on record, but Modi, yeah? Hey, hey, ho, ho. Modi has to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Modi has to go. Okay, and then we'll, one more, and then we'll go to our next speaker. So the Dalit anthem is called Jai Bhim. I'm from the Dalit community, and it wouldn't be appropriate if we didn't say Jai Bhim today. So I say Jai Bhim, and you say Jai Jai Bhim. You okay? I say Jai Bhim, and you say Jai Jai Bhim. Jai Bhim! Jai Bhim! Jai Bhim! Thank you so much. I would like to introduce our next speaker. I'd like to introduce Jayati Ghosh, who's an Indian development economist. But I'm sure that, you know, just not Indian, but she's very relevant to the global economic policy today. She has taught economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi for nearly 35 years. And since January 2021, she's been professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, USA. Her core areas of study include international economics and globalization, employment patterns in developing countries, macroeconomic policy, and gender and development. I'd like to welcome Jayati. The time is yours.
Thanks so much, my dear. Well, you know, it's really great to be here. Yesterday, I was the other side, and I have to say the atmosphere is completely different. It's very good. It's great to be here. I actually want to talk about how we cope with the world today and how we're going to strategize going forward, because I've been talking to lots of people, especially after we got the latest draft of the Pact for the Future. And the overwhelming feeling is disappointment, right? I mean, everybody is saying, oh my God, this is so much less ambitious than even the previous week or the previous week and so on. And everyone's depressed. So I have a few messages. I forgot to count them, so I don't know how many, whatever. Okay. The first message is really that, you know, we shouldn't be disheartened. Because let's face it, we are in a geopolitics where it's almost a miracle that there is any statement at all. We also know that many of those well-sounding statements are meant never to be implemented. We know that, and we've been there before, so fine, forget all that. Let's look for the cracks. Let's look for the things where we can actually pull on them to get something out of it. And I think there are still things in there that we can pull out. So, for example, there is the discussion on beyond GDP, which is something that, several of us have been very actively engaged within the UN to try and push for a couple of years now. And in that discussion, at least it is mentioned that we have to do that. We have to look for other metrics. I was part of a board in the UN where we suggested 5 additional measures that the UN statistical system has to collect. Not just, so it's fine for us to keep saying replace GDP, but we have to begin by forcing all national governments to actually have certain metrics. So we had suggested what I had called the labor market indicator, which is the employment rate by gender, by men and women separately, into the median wage rate, right? That is the average of below which half of the workers have it. If you use that indicator, you will say, for example, US and India, countries where the GDP has been growing, the labor market indicator is either flat or falling. So if governments collect that data, that gives us something to mobilize around, okay? Time use data. At the moment, only 82 countries have any time use data. But we can actually get the UN statistical system to say every country has to do it, which means they have to provide the technical expertise and the resources to collect this data. It changes everything. If you get gender disaggregated data on paid work, unpaid work, and personal and relational time, we can actually track that to know what's the real condition of what people are doing in our societies, okay? Food access, it's a huge issue now. The FAO already collects data on the proportion of the population that can afford the minimally nutritious diet. I can tell you in India, our supposed poverty rate, income poverty, is 14% right now. 72% cannot afford the nutritious diet. Slightly different numbers, right? In terms of how we calculate. The per capita calorie consumption, why? And food grain consumption, because that's a curve as well. Some countries, there's too much food grain consumption, like here, because of all of the livestock that is being fed on the grain. In some countries, there's too little, for obvious reasons that we all know, including all the stuff that is happening in the global food market. And then per capita carbon emissions, but multiplied by the inequality in that carbon emissions between the top 10% and the bottom 50%. Let's try and push, so when we suggested this, it went through that, it went through, the Secretary General approved it, it went to ECOSOC. And, in ECOSOC, it didn't die a death. You know what happens in ECOSOC? Things go into cold storage. There isn't enough noise. There isn't enough backing for it. There isn't, frankly, enough civil society engagement in it. We need to actually combine forces to suggest other indicators and force the UN statistical system to do it, because that makes a difference. It automatically enables us to actually mobilize around these issues and demand that our economic policies cater to some of that. Okay, so number one, about not getting disheartened. There are several other issues. I'm sure you will all be able to find issues where we can push and expand on what is there to actually get something out of it. The second is something that I unfortunately have been learning from the right wing in my own country and globally, which is to have a long-term vision. We get so easily disheartened. And so every time we have a setback, we say, oh my God, that's over. And now what do we do, etc. They don't. They're out there burrowing. They keep at it. I mean, the Mo Pelerin society, which is the basis of the neoliberal economy that we're all grappling with today, half a century ago they started? Actually, even more. Oh my God, yeah, almost a century ago, they were at it. And they kept at it and kept at it until they got there. So yes, sure, they have capital on their side, but finally we have people on our side, so we have to keep at it in the same way. The long-term vision, yeah. The third thing is that, we have to also be strategic. And I do feel, okay, this is just me talking among friends. I feel that we are almost being encouraged to fritter away our energies and resources in endless meetings around the world. How many summits next year? I mean, okay, we're here. There will be a whole bunch before the Financing for Development Summit. There will be a whole bunch before the World Social Summit. There will be the Washington meetings of, the World Bank and the IMF. There will be this, there will be that. We are running from meeting to meeting, having to show our face, and we don't get time to do the real work. And I'm not, I mean, I don't want to say there's a conspiracy theory because but there is a reason why perhaps we're not being strategic enough in our resources. I'm beginning to think, I don't want to go to Washington and waste my time there. It's just a show. They don't care. They just want to pretend that, yeah, we've got civil society in there. Why waste my time? Maybe if all of us ignore it, it makes a difference. Maybe they say, oh, wait a minute. I don't know. I mean, I think we have to be thinking more strategically about how we spend our time, our resources, our people. We really are frittering a lot of it away in things that we know are not going to go anywhere. So that's my third. I don't know. I'm thinking aloud, and it's you can well disagree, but I think we're all, some of us, making kinds of similar mistakes. The fourth thing is that we are definitely not that strong, and so we have to have coalitions. So when we're strategic, we have to also be building coalitions, issue-based coalitions, with all kinds of different groups. And I don't know how good we are at that, because we tend to be quite, at least I do, let me be honest, distrustful and sometimes even disrespectful of people on another track because I feel that they haven't been good on some particular issue. And we all have multiple issues. And so if somebody has not been great on X issue, then we say, I don't want to go with them on Y issue. We can't afford that anymore. We have to hold our nose and hold hands. Really, because we are really facing very complicated, multiple and powerful enemies. We have to be able to create coalitions and work together very, very aggressively, if you see what I mean, on specific issues. And that also means then, at one level, yes, working on every front, but in the strategic part, that, we building coalitions also strategically. This is, as I said, it's just me thinking aloud, but I honestly believe that when I see all of you, when I talk to lots of people, as a movement, there are so many powerful movements. There are such amazing things happening. We just heard about Kenya, amazing, right? Sri Lanka, after that Aragalaya, we were all so depressed that they ended up with an illegitimate government that was even worse than the one that they had managed to overthrow peacefully. They've just had an election, and we know that that illegitimate government, the president managed to get 17% of the vote, right? In other words, it does create a change. It does enable changes, and we have to recognize, if you like, the glass half full. Business is a cliche. We have to actually keep pushing for all of the spaces we see in a way that over time is going to make a difference. So it's a kind of combination of that long-term and strategic thing. But as I said, these are just me thinking aloud. I do believe the collective power is immense, and we should be willing to draw on our collective power as much as possible. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think we need to think how we can, where to engage, like in which UN processes, for example, but also how to work together. So that's also one topic here, how we can really strengthen our cooperation. So we have our next great speaker, Alessandra Nilo from Brazil. She is founder and director of Gestoes, and very known as a feminist. I just learned you're also a filmmaker. That's interesting. And she is also organizing partner of the Women's Major Group in Latin America and Caribbean, or what's the region? Yes, so great to have you here. And at the moment, also the C20 Sherpa, which is also quite interesting. So please, Alessandra.
Thank you so much, Ingo. Good morning, everyone. I'm really kind of shy to speak like this, so I stay here because Ingo said that I have 5 minutes, so I took some notes to share with you. So yes, I have the role and the responsibility this year of being the Sherpa for the C20. C20 is the group that since 2013 is recognized as one of the engagement groups that are responsible for taking the voice of civil society to the G20. And as you know, this year G20 is happening in Brazil. next year, we will have the G20 in South Africa, and probably this will be our, let's say, last window of opportunity to see things moving forward before we go to the G20 in the US. And in the US, that we hope that you have a female president for, the first time. We also know that when we are talking about economic issues, it will be very difficult to advance with our agenda. The other point that I think it's important to make is that G20 is also having more and more, uh, it has already power in terms of commercial relations, economic, etc., because, it unites the richest economies in the world. They are responsible for, they have the larger number of populations in their country, but they are also responsible for the largest of the problems that we face nowadays. So they have this double responsibility. At the same time, I'd like to make the point that we are concerned because we have been insisting in C20 about the need of having political coherence between what the G20 is saying in their meetings and trying to advance and what the governments are agreeing here at the UN. So we are particularly concerned about the distance between their decisions in relation to the SDGs, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, and also the climate change commitments, as we know. At the same time, I'd like also to stress that I don't share the feeling that we need to forget about what is going on in the another building. I'm going home today after 3 weeks, very tense 3 weeks, because I think what is happening here with this pact of the future that some people are starting to mention or refer to as pact of no future is that it is indicating that even facing the urgent climate change, even facing the level of disruption at the economics that we are seeing, even facing the level of increase inequalities between and among countries, governments are still good to say, yes, we need to go, we need to move on. But when time comes to say how to move on, how to resolve the problems, there is no agreement. And it is a good indication for us as we prepare for the Finance for Development Fourth Conference next year, and as we prepare for the Global Tax Convention next year. So we need to be prepared. We cannot forget what is happening here. So, and we cannot be also happy that we got 2 or 1 or 3 paragraphs about what is going on here. This is going to be a very tough year ahead. The other point that I'd like to say is that these conversations, all these conversations, even the conversation that you have in the FFD next year, even the conversation on global taxation next year, the conversations around the reform of finance architecture, these are not new conversations. We have been around, they have been around for decades now, right? So why should I be happy of approving a pact of the future that basically saying, let's agree about move on with the agreements that we approved in the past and that were not fulfilled? That's this is the situation that we have in front of us. And so my first call for the uh, Global People's Forum is that we need to demonstrate that we are not happy. We cannot come here to say, it's okay, doesn't matter, let's move on because you need to do other stuff. It's everything together. It's not one or another process. It's our challenge is how to link the process going on with G20, with G7, at the UN, at different multilateral spaces and multilateral forums and just keep consistent saying the same message. And the same message must be, and this is my second call, about the urgency. Yesterday, I was participating in a meeting with women, uh, the UN women. So they presented a lot of data. Some of the data showing that gender equality will require more than 200 years to be achieved. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but we don't have 200 years, okay? So it's not like, okay, let's move on because we had this paragraph approved. Of course, for instance, we need to have data, much more improved data. We need to have new parameters, new indicators. There is a lot of things to be achieved. It's a fact. But also, let me put a question to this audience. Is the situation that we are facing to date a lack of evidence? We are here at this moment in history because civil society did not put forward evidence to the governments. We have been talking about climate change for the last 30 years with evidence. Everything that we are facing nowadays is because those governments in that building did not take action. And they will continue not take action if we are, satisfied with something, a little piece that year by year they are giving to us. So we are here, we spend sleeps without sleeping, right? We are far away from our families and our homes. And then when we return the next year, we get perhaps a new language, perhaps two additions in their commitments. This is not enough. And I think we need to show that to our governments. I absolutely agree that in order to make things different, the only thing that we can make different is to intensify our coalitions, our connections. So this is not more about the women's issue, about disability people issue, LGBTQI issue. This is not more about our specific issues, but we need to understand that the base, the core of everything is this economic context, this economic model that is failing to us. The financial architectures, institution architecture, it's failing to deliver to the people. That's why we are not having enough money to invest in Kenya, in Brazil, in gender-based violence, in education, in health, and you list. So we don't have that money because this economic model is impeding us to have access to the resources that we have. So civil society has been also consistently insisting that the situation is not the lack of finance available for us. The situation is political because the decision where to invest and where to put the money and how to allocate the money or how to interpret the data that for years we have been providing to them is political. So the only way, and this is my third call, the only way to change the situation is to influence the political process. Political matters. It matters. And I see a lot of young people that just don't care about the politics. They don't, if they are not obliged to go and vote, they are stay home. What is that? So to conclude, I think that my particular call for us and the way that I think we can move on and go forward, it's really, besides strengthening our coalitions, is really to see how we, as civil society, can do things differently. We have been consistently saying to the governments, oh, this is a business as usual. You are going as business as usual. Aren't we going and acting as business as usual as well? I have been, in this building the last week, and I was like, oh my gosh, people sit, they deliver this speech, and that's it. I don't see the movements, but we will only change that not here in this building. at the national level. So here again, I have another call. And my call when talking about economic is that my colleagues, amazing civil society activists, groups, colleagues, movements, at the rich countries, we think they are rich countries. Sorry, but you need to do a better homework, okay? You cannot come to me from the South expecting that my country will be able to change these G7 positions here. They will not change here. Only their own citizens can change their positions in their own countries. So you need, not you, but we need to do better. And our colleagues from the North, from the rich countries, need to do much better for that. This is not the place where we win this battle. And then it's important to say that for many, many years, we have been acting together. But I see that the international cooperation is developing in a way that some of the most powerful international organizations in the North are not able to do advocacy in their own country because this is the way the cooperation was set, right? So there are laws impeding that. We need to change that laws. We need to find a way to do advocacy within these countries because here we are not going to solve this situation. And finally, my last request is that we need to show the insatisfaction of with this process. We need to show that because I don't think that we are spending our lives just to put forward data, just to say or to present a very interesting and full of data analysis of the situation. We are here because we want to have transformation. This is what our colleague from the Global People's Assembly was requesting us to scream here, right? That we want change, they want change now. Well, I'm sorry to say, but we don't have more time. We don't have more time. This is an urgent situation. And if you don't come up and to talk to our governments with this sense of urgency, there will be no change. There will be no other way forward. I'm not a pessimist person, you know me. I'm very optimist, and I think we should continue fighting, but with more realistic lens, you know, and with the sense of urgency, because I can see that governments can continue doing business as usual, but that will be very sad in the future of history when they look back and see that we as civil society also did our work as a business as usual. So I think we can do better, and the only way to do that better is to do better together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. That was great. So before our next speaker, maybe one more slogan. You up for it? Okay. The people united. The people united. What is this? I can't hear you. How they will hear you? The people united. The people united. Okay, our next speaker is Mithika Mwenda, who is the Executive Director of Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Mithika.
Thank you. Are people united? My friend, it can't go that way if that is how you respond. Are people united? Thank you. I will take from my colleagues who have spoken by first applauding the Secretariat of GPA, Ingo, and the organizing committee for this very well organized event. I have been part of the organizing committee. And what attracted us in this organizing is that as a movement from Africa working on climate change, climate justice, we felt and reasoned that we cannot work together. We cannot work in isolation. And that is the message I'm hearing from other colleagues, that we have been working in silos, whether as thematic areas, whether as people working in various sectors, whether working in various regions, whether working in the civil society, we work in silos. And that is why we have been defeated, because we have to accept the reality, so that we go back to the factory settings, that we have lost it. Why do I say that? I consider myself to be a progressive, as you do, those who are here. But we have not reflected and asked ourselves, if we put ourselves to the era, the period of Martin Luther King and those luminary of anti-slavery movement, if we put ourselves there, how did they do it? How did it work? And then we go back at, the period after the World War II, when Adolf Hitler annihilated the races, and that is where it started. That is the right-wing movement, which has taken over the world now. That did not go to sleep, but we who call ourselves the progressives decided that we achieved it, and that is why we find ourselves that even the spaces which we used to occupy have been injected by that movement. And there is no surprise that we are struggling here, even in the United States now, that we are facing another threat of a right-wing movement taking over the government, as it has worked in Europe, even in Scandinavian countries, where we used to really believe that is the people who used to stand with the truth, democracy, liberalism. Now we have lost it. You have seen what is happening. And we are not surprised that even within where in climate movements, in the UNFCCC, in the UN, that is the situation. I think we need a radical change. We need to think radically. We need transformation. How then do we transform that? Really, it is not the way we are operating. And that's why, as Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, we have it that we need really solidarity among movements. We need to work with that movement. We need to work with tax movements. We need to work with women movements. We need to work with biodiversity movement. We will need to work with end poverty movement. And we need to work with everybody. We need to work with young people. We need to really to reinvigorate the movements. If we are not able to do that, I can assure you we'll be having meetings. We will be having lamentations that now we have lost it at that big building, without really realizing that actually we are accomplices in that. Because we have tendency of working in silos, not only within the global south, but also global north. We work at cross purposes. So my call and our call is that we need really to put our differences. We need to put our differences aside. We don't need to depart from really just participating in events, just as decorations, just as rituals, really to chart a pathway forward, collectivity, working in collective partnership, and a process which have milestones which we need to deliver. And those milestones are, for instance, now we have been discussing since the UN Civil Society Conference in Nairobi. We met there, discussed. I've never heard people asking ourselves, what did we say and what do we committed? We are talking about the government commitments, but we also, after we leave here, we forget it until we wait for another GPA. I attended the last GPA. I want really to believe that we followed up on what we agreed on the last GPA. Otherwise, this is now the trap which has been laid by the anti-people forces, and they are very comfortable that they have hijacked the process. They have treated us as diverted our attention. So here today, as the people, we know that this is going to be a process, a pact for the future of inaction, definitely. In 6 years' time, we are going to say goodbye to the Agenda 2030. And we are very, very now busy thinking about the future. So without asking ourselves, how did we implement this one? We in Africa, just before we came here, we met in a big jamboree at governments and everybody trying to think about the future. And I believe that even next year, that is what we are going to do. At the UNFCCC, in few days, we are going to the COP29. And then that will end with COP30, and so forth, and so forth. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not the transformation we are looking for. We believe that we can catalyze action. The most radical decisions, actions, have always come from people like here. It will never come from there. We need to catalyze from here. What we can promise as PAGJA, we have a very strong, robust infrastructure in Africa, and we are ready to provide that infrastructure in all countries across Africa, platforms which have thousands and thousands of people, so that really we need to trickle down. We need really to inspire a bottom-up movement, which is owned. Let us create a movement owned by the people. People's ownership is very important. But I'm not saying like GPA is not important, but GPA, which is anchored from the people, is going to be sustainable and generate a critical mass of like-minded people who are going to be able to face the realities, which is very difficult in the world dominated by war, Ukraine and Israeli, Hamas, the Sudan, where we come from, which is forgotten, and many others. The biodiversity loss, climate crisis, pandemics, and those others. These are the ones we need to work together. We need to connect the climate movement. We need to connect the biodiversity movement, the women movement, youth movement, and we promise that through that, we are going to overcome the challenges which we face. We look forward for this discussion, and thank you very much for the 52 organizers and groups which we are working together. And let us work together for this and the future generation which are now. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mithika, and especially also for your call to work together. I mean, not only now, but also in the last months of the preparation that was very strong. So I'm happy to see Chenai because, yeah, you are the next. Chenai Mukumba, Executive Director of the Tax Justice Network in Africa, but also representing the civil society FFD mechanism. So very happy to have you here as also one of the key processes. So let me just say my appreciation, or maybe congratulations also for the whole work on the UN Tax Convention. I think that's really a great process, maybe the only one where we are hopeful, and I mean the African group of African countries, they played a key role, but also the civil society, like you and colleagues, you did a great work for that. So congratulations for that.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I love it. I'm so excited to be here. A huge thank you for the invitation to be able to speak. As was mentioned, my name is Chenai Mukumba. I work for the Tax Justice Network Africa. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Civil Society Financing for Development Mechanism, a collective of civil society organizations, social movements that are working to contribute to the financing for development processes. And TJNA is a member of that, and we contribute specifically on the tax justice stream, but essentially are really excited to be part of this collective group of civil society organizations. So I'm going to speak to you very briefly. I know I don't have too much time. There are 3 points I want to make, one of which will be an invitation. I'll speak to that a bit later. And then I'll conclude on a note of optimism. And the reason I say this is because I think whilst there are a number of things that we are not happy with, right, including, for example, the outcome of the discussions that are happening just next door, I think it is important to take stock of the fact that not all of it is pessimistic. There are some things that we need to be looking forward to. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the current discussions that are happening right now on the financing for development negotiations. The FFD negotiations are a platform for us to really bring to the fore conversations that every single movement has flagged as important. And this is the conversation around the reform of the international financial architecture. Now, there's a whole host of different discussions that we can bring to the table when talking about FFD4, the negotiations that are happening next year. But one of the things that I think is particularly important for us as civil society to think about as we prepare for Spain is that the FFD negotiation is one of the only platforms where we can actually have meaningful and substantive negotiations on reform of the international financial architecture. There aren't many other platforms where we can come together and start to talk about the kind of changes that we need to have. And specifically, the kinds of changes that this platform allows us to discuss are the governance of the international financial architecture questions. So specifically, what can we do to start to shift the conversation of the international financial architecture reform from a few countries that currently dictate the current global rules to a space that is much more inclusive, to a space that is much more democratic, and a space that is more participatory. And so this is the kind of reform that we think is necessary to have in order to really address these systemic issues that we have. So as the civil society financing for development mechanism, there are 2 things that we think we need to really concentrate on, particularly as we head towards Spain next year. The first is we really need to push for the United Nations to have a much more central role with regards to the reform of all of the various streams of economic justice that we work in. So specifically, we have been doing a lot of work, as was mentioned, to see how we can reform the global tax rules. And ultimately, what you see now is this very same shift, right, from where there were a few countries that were determining the rules of the global tax system to a space now where this is shifting towards the United Nations. But also, it's an opportunity for us to say, whilst we are making this progress within tax, there's no reason why we shouldn't expect the same in other areas of work as well. So for those of you who attended the PrepCom meeting in Addis, you'll note that the Africa group and the group of 77 actually stated that, you know what, we want a United Nations Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt. Basically saying we want a reform of the multilateral legal framework of debt because of the way in which it is skewed against countries that are essentially considered borrowers. And so there's also an opportunity, even for those of you who might be working in development cooperation, right, to say, is there room for us to also consider a United Nations Framework Convention on Development Cooperation, right? Spaces where both developed and developing countries can come to the fore and make their demands on an equal and level playing field, where those that have more economic power can't use that to dictate the rules, right? Where countries like Lesotho have as much say and have as much sway in the decision as the United States. And so this is why we see the FFD space as a really, really important space to be having conversations. The other thing that I think is important, even as we start to have negotiations on FFD and the kinds of things that we want to see, we need to take note that that what is most important isn't necessarily specifically the dollars and cents that are required for us to meet our sustainable development goals, right? The conversation about structural and systemic reform should be much deeper than that. Our calls essentially should be for a reform of the international financial architecture that provides for the fiscal and policy space for developing countries to then be able to generate the revenue they need to meet those sustainable development goals, right? So for example, right now, many developing countries find themselves at the bottom of value chains, right? They find themselves exporting low value products. They find themselves importing food and find themselves importing manufactured goods. Those are systemic issues that are inbuilt into the current framework that we have that we need to question, because essentially what they're doing is they're undermining the ability of developing countries to be able to raise the revenue that they need to meet their developmental objectives, right? So whilst the dollars and cents are definitely an important question, we need to be thinking deeper. We need to be thinking much larger about the kinds of outcomes that we need to have. The second point I want to make is that I agree with previous speakers. The outcome of the discussions that have been happening on the Summit of the Future are definitely lackluster. I think we had hoped for much more ambitious things that came out of that. What for us is quite, the reason we still remain hopeful and optimistic is because the FFD negotiations that hopefully will start to gain much more attention now do not need to be determined by what has just come out from the Summit of the Future. It's a completely independent process, and so allows us to go back to the ambitious goals and outcomes that we each had in our various streams of work, right? And so this, for us, as far as we were concerned, we saw it, and I think somebody used the same phrasing, as a distraction, right? From the actual more meaningful conversations that we think need to be had. So even as these discussions are happening and hopefully will come to an end, I think the point I want to say is that there is no need for us to water down our objectives or feel that we need to use the pact of the future as the basis for conversations, right? We have an opportunity to go back to where we had wanted to be right from the beginning. The third point I wanted to make is that I mentioned earlier that as TGNA, we are part of the Financing for Development mechanism. What this particular platform does is that it brings together a whole host of civil societies and social movements on one platform where we spend time, sometimes it's not an easy or enjoyable time, but time trying to find a way for us to reach a general consensus on the type of demands and asks that we have for our governments. And the reason for this is that at times we have found that as civil society will have differing views and perspectives to which we come to governments with as far as demands are concerned. And they use that against us. They use that to undermine our input into certain processes and say, well, there's no singular or certain specific position around which you coalesce. And so what we try to do as the civil society mechanism is bring together every single institution that's working on various areas of work to see how we can arrive on certain asks on various streams of work. And as I mentioned, we work on the tax justice within the tax justice stream of work. And there's incredible power in agreeing what it is that we want to ask about demands when you start to see civil society both in the North and the South making the same ask as far as the outcomes they want to see. Now, as I conclude, I think I mentioned, I want to conclude on an optimistic note. I think a lot of the asks that we have been making as civil society over the years, as far as the reform of the international financial architecture, we haven't seen that much traction. Before I joined the tax justice space, I used to be part of the trade policy community. And I remember in the 2000s when the Doha Development Agenda was really shot, right? And the reason for this was because developing countries were now starting to rise and make demands, right? And because of that, things didn't seem to be moving. And I always questioned that, right? What kind of multilateralism is it that falls apart the minute developing countries start to make demands that are in their own interests, right? Fast forward 20 years, I am optimistic because we are now starting to see developing countries spearhead changes within the multilateral framework that are beginning to upend systems and structures that have long held them in positions that have undermined their ability to meet their developmental objectives. And of course, for those of you who know, right now I'm talking about what's happening within the tax space. It's almost completely unheard of, right? That the Africa Group is spearheading within the United Nations a process that is going to shift the power of decision-making from the 30 countries that essentially had been in charge for almost 100 years to a space where, like I said, every single country has one vote, regardless of how big or how small you were. When I was following the negotiations this year, I remember when, for those of you who know the map of Africa, you'll know that Lesotho was a tiny country right at the bottom of the continent. I remember when Lesotho raised their flag and said, you know what, for the past 30, 40 years, we have had issues with the global tax rules, but never were we asked if we had an opinion on them, and never were our views ever taken into consideration when these rules were being made. This marks the first time ever that Lesotho can say something and know that what we are saying will hold as much weight, as much power as the biggest countries within the global economy. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the direction of multilateralism and what that could mean for all of the work that we're doing today. So I'm going to conclude on that note, and thank you so much again for having us.
Thank you so much, and many congratulations on the tax convention. I know that this is a process that many of us have been following, and excellent work out there, so big congratulations. For our next speaker, we will have Amitabh Behar, who is the Executive Director of Oxfam International. I know that many of us already know him in the room, so I'm not going to introduce him further. Amitabh, time is yours.
Thank you, Beena, and I'm really happy to be here. But let me start first with a strong salute and solidarity to Faith and the young activist in Kenya. You've done a phenomenal job. Salute to you. And thank you to the organizers. As Ingo said, 42 organizers. That's quite something. Phenomenal, just the idea of bringing 42 entities, 52, remarkable. That's fantastic. And I would have said when we were talking about the origins of GCAP, Beena, just a 1 minute shot of Nelson Mandela launching GCAP would have been really good. So I hope during the day you can play that. It's a very powerful 1 minute video when Nelson Mandela launched this. We are here, many of us, I'm sure, again after one full year. We were here last year, but since then, the world has changed dramatically. It's changed dramatically. And I want to talk about those dramatic changes. I want to take you to that small portion of land, which I'm told is probably as small as in terms of geography, from the city that I come from, which is Delhi. I'm talking of Gaza. What you have seen in the last 1 year, 40,000 people have been killed, 11,000 children. At the moment in Gaza, what you're looking at is forced starvation. 90% of the people have been displaced more than once. Not once. I have my colleagues, I had around 30 colleagues there. Everybody has had to move more than once. They've moved twice, thrice, and we continue to see that devastation does not stop here. So that's what's happening in Gaza. Let's not forget. It is absolutely unprecedented. I think that the world has changed in this 1 year dramatically. I had the privilege of going with my colleagues in South Sudan to a small border town of Sudan and South Sudan called Renk. And I was there for 3 or 4 hours. And every 10 minutes, I encountered at least 20 to 30 people coming with, looking completely lost. And they were coming, just escaping the conflict, coming into South Sudan. 30 to 40. And I met a woman there. And that's something which just does not go away from me. She and her family came in, and the first thing they said, "Where's the hospital?" And this is actually the border, way away from the hospital. And we said, "What is the issue?" And she said, she had a bullet lodged in her hip, and she needed to reach the hospital to get the bullet out. That's what we are seeing in South Sudan. So this world that we are talking of, I like the optimism at times, but we also need to look at the grim reality, how the world has been brutalized in just this 1 year. But let me also take you to another area that I work on. And last year, I'm sure I discussed our previous inequality report. The sad part is inequality gets more and more obscene. So what we're looking at, this year our report tells us the top 5 billionaires have doubled their wealth. They've doubled their wealth. And 5 billion people, which is 60% of the humanity, has become poorer. That's the level of inequality we are looking at. In the last 1 decade, the billionaires have added 42 trillion to their kitty. And this is the first time in now 25 years when we are seeing hunger actually grow. So that's the level of inequality we're looking at. I just want us to take a pause and look all around us, what's happening. And then start thinking about, I know I have limited time, so I just wanted to take you to where the world is. And yesterday I was in a panel inside the building in a side event, and I just remembered, many of you would remember in 2013-14, we were part of this campaign called The World We Want. I'm sure many of you remember that. This is certainly not the world we want, where we are. What do we do is the question, because I have limited time and I'm going to learn from my previous speakers, try and make 5 specific suggestions. And hopefully those suggestions can be taken forward. But let me just again say how excited I'm to be here and not just be inside. As in, if I had come here and had only been in the meetings inside, I would have felt very, very unfulfilled. So let me just, and sorry, I have not talked of the other kinds of crises that we're looking at. The climate crisis is there. What you're looking at, gender rights actually backsliding everywhere. You have to now fight in this country in several states to just exercise your reproductive right. So that's where we are. What do we need to do? I'm going to talk of 5 specific things. The first is defending the normative ideals on which the UN itself was established. When I look around, I think that the fundamental ideals of the post-war world, which can easily be summarized as in, for me, it's very easy because I read it every day in my Indian constitution. They're essentially the 4 ideas of equality, freedom, fraternity, and justice. And those normative ideals today are under serious threat. So I think as civil society, one of our first responsibility is to hold on to that normative framework. Because I think it was unthinkable 15 years ago that a presidential candidate could speak the kind of homophobic, uh, racist language that we hear, a presidential candidate. It was unacceptable. But now you're hearing that, and not just here. Whether you look at the EU election, you have actually seen a far-right, uh, not majority, but several new parliamentarians. Look at France. We were almost at the brink of looking at a rightist regime. So that's the normative worldview has to be defended. And we need to really find ways. You know, sometimes we all keep looking at, and a lot of our donors, etc., create this trouble of, oh, give us impact, give us results, go for small wins. This is not about small wins. This is about the soul of humanity. This is about the future of humanity. So that's the first one that I wanted to talk of. The second, systems change. I think with what we are doing, you have heard that from everyone, but we just cannot have a siloized approach. It's just not all right. As in, you cannot say that I work on gender rights, but I have nothing to do with Dalit rights that Beena was talking of. That's not what is going to deliver. And it's you know, let me give you uh, an example also. I just talked of Gaza. What happens in Gaza? The war is happening. You ask for ceasefire in this same building. You have the US vetoing it. Even for a ceasefire, we needed 6 months. That resolution was vetoed 4 times before it was passed. What then happens is the arms trade continues. There's huge profiteering. Let's not forget about conflict and its interrelationship with arms trade. We've all forgotten about the arms trade treaty. There's huge profiteering happening. And these super rich corporations then actually, again, just to quote from an Oxfam report, the top 1% are responsible for twice the emission of the bottom 50% carbon emissions. They are responsible then for the climate catastrophe. This is all linked. So we will need both a holistic and a systems approach. So like my comrade was saying earlier, this is about transformation. This is not about tinkering around the edges. This is about fundamentally changing the system. So that's the second, that's the approach I hope we can do. Third, to do this, let's come on, let's really get into a rainbow coalition. We've talked of this for a long time. Do we have a trade unionist here? Great, one. I would love to see many, many, many more in this room. Do we have peasant groups here? I don't know. So this is not to tell us that in that 52, we are inadequate, but we need to make it 152, 552, but it has to be a rainbow coalition. We really need different groups to be able to build our power. It's not going to work, as in if we just speak to ourselves, amongst ourselves, we are not going to make the change that we want. It is about building that rainbow coalition, and we need to be very intentional about that rainbow coalition. We'll need to spend time in reaching out. But the second that I wanted to say around this is that when we're talking of rainbow coalitions, we only talk of mass-based groups. And I'll come to that, we need to do that. But there are different roles when you build a coalition. Somebody who does research. So the tax justice network is as critical, which has a voice in the UN tax convention. It gives me a lot of hope. Otherwise, in this very gloomy scenario, I'm constantly looking at the tax justice network's work around the tax convention that maybe we're going to get something. So it's really, my request would be, let's not do the black and white of, oh, this is people's power and this is, oh, we don't work with knowledge power. It's really building, weaving together that coalition. The fourth I'm very, very happy that the way the room is structured, not this wall. This wall, we need to tear away walls anyways. Uh, this one needs to be taken away. But in terms of how it's done, what I think is that a lot of us in civil society have ended up becoming this. This is what we do. As in, all our gaze is constantly there. I think that's not the role of civil society. That's certainly not the role of civil society. The gaze cannot be towards the power holders. The gaze has to be with the people. It's about working with the people. It's about helping in building people's power. It's not about feeling happy that, oh, as in just imagine we had to stand in a queue for 2 hours yesterday to get into the building. And my friends who are inside the building, they're saying that they're not even getting into the main room. You are sitting in an overflow room watching the proceedings on a monitor. That gaze is not acceptable. We feel happy, we are given, Jayati ji is saying the same thing. Have we created too many processes? We are just caught in just doing these processes. That's not what we need to do. It is about, let's go back to the hard work of organizing and mobilizing. Many of us have forgotten organizing and mobilizing. Big wins don't happen just on around the summits. It's about building people's power brick by brick every day. So that's my fourth call to all of us. Let's go back to organizing, mobilizing. Let's forget, you don't go to the UN, that's all right. The people will ensure that the power holders listen to them. And that's the fifth, is a salute to people's power. Let's recognize, let's be humble. We have seen what happened in Kenya. I often live in Kenya, so I know the power of people. I've seen it firsthand. I come from South Asia. It's phenomenal just around me. We saw in Sri Lanka 2 years ago. I don't know if it's 2 years or even less, 2 years ago. I thought, it looked slightly unruly, but the pictures were very powerful. Common citizens entering the president house, jumping into the presidential swimming pool. I felt hugely empowered. It was, in India, you just can't walk almost half a kilometer away from where the power center is. But here, people had taken over the presidential palace. Look at Bangladesh. Yes, when social movements, there's people's uprising, there will be problems. We must ensure that does not happen. But what we are seeing in Bangladesh was a phenomenal uprising of young people. So let's recognize it's this people's power, and we are behind the curve. Let's be honest. As organized civil society, we are behind the curve, and we are often not able to work with this people's power. So I'm in a way making a fundamental call. Let's change the gaze, work with people's power, look at organizing and mobilizing. These movements would happen. And that's the fundamental shift that we need to make. And finally, I would just say, all this is going to need a lot of courage. Its change is not going to happen in a very comfortable way. It's going to be tough, and we need to be willing to pay a price for it. It does not happen. No moment of change has happened by writing petitions. So let's recognize what's at stake. It is those normative ideals. As in, I still get goosebumps when I read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that is really the North Star for which we need to work. So let's really use this People's Assembly to do a call for a fundamental transformation to ensure that we have an equal and just world. Thank you.
Thank you, Amitabh. Yeah, many points raised by you and by others for our discussions in the coming days. So as I said at the beginning, we will have almost a full day to plan for the future, to coordinate on advocacy, to plan for mobilization on Tuesday. And I would like to invite all of you to participate with all your ideas and energy. So we will go through the program soon, but before we have one important point. This Global People's Assembly is somehow the highlight, the culmination of a process, of a bottom-up process, of communities assemblies at local level, at village level, then coming together at national people's assemblies. Then we meet at regional level online in regional assemblies before we come here. So this is a growing, let's say, movement, and this is about organizing. This is about, involving people, especially different groups. We have heard about, of course, women's groups, youth groups, Dalits group, communities discriminated by work and descent, indigenous groups, persons with disabilities, LGBTQI plus. So all kind of different groups coming together and talking about their situation and also formulating demands to their governments. So this is a process we started in 2019. And we would like to hear from some colleagues, some short messages from this year. So I'd like to start with Arjun Bhattarai, who is the Secretary General of the NGO Federation in Nepal, a very big network of more than 6,000 organizations. He is also, or he was one of the main organizers of the World Social Forum this year in Kathmandu. Which was, I think, a great event. And he is also the global co-chair of GCAP. So Arjun will give us some inputs from Asia.
Thank you, Ingo. Hi, good morning. And after hearing Amitabh, so I'm a little bit nervous, but anyway, I'm sharing what we are doing in the real ground. Of course, yeah, as Ingo said that, like we started the People Assembly since 2019 and doing from different modality, of course, not, same format like what you are doing, because we need, we need a people's voices. Of course, the people's voice is very, very powerful and very, very strong. So as Ingo said, the People Assembly, actually, it's a bottom-up approach, not in a top-down approach, because we gather the peoples in the communities, and peoples mean different peoples, like young peoples, women's group, disabilities communities, and the LGBTIQs, Dalit, and all marginalized communities. They come together and they share their voices. It started from the municipality or rural municipality levels, and it converted the district level or provincial levels, and it goes to the national level. So not only the peoples, because the peoples always like our voices, we can hear and we can share, but we want to share the people voices towards the decision makers, parliamentarians, and officers, or bureaucrats, because they are they are doing some decision for the people. So, and it's being very strong, mechanisms, people mechanisms. So at GCAP, together with different different civil society platforms that are doing since 2019. The World Social Forum we organized in Nepal, and across the global, we invited more than 30,000 peoples, and many from South Asian country, Bangladesh and India. So, and there's different people assembly. So the people assembly is just not one. So this year, even like, in Nepal, what we do, we mobilize the people, we utilize the people assembly to even do the, like, volunteer national review. What we do, like, we did, like, volunteer local review led by the children, and children group, they themselves, they organize. And even the, like, volunteer local review led by the disability communities, they gather themselves, they criticize the, like, STG report of the government. So, and volunteer local review led by the women's group. So this kinds of, like, modality we are doing since, like, long. So there's a couple of demand I want to share, like, demand of the, like, Asian People Assembly, what we did this year in the, like, in the virtual format, because of, like, resources and other. So basically, like, over 100 like different stakeholders, they join in our, Asian People Assembly, and there were the parliamentary group, and of course there's the farmers, there were, like, trade union movements, there were, like, feminist movements, youth movements. So what we demanded this year in the Asia, like, adopt a universal social protection floor, majority through the public funding, broaden the definition of the food to include the nutrition and the access, and of course there's a right of the farmers and land, and the food and nutrition, institutional credit, and involve local communities in the ecological planning for the sustainable use of water, land, forest, and other natural resources. We demanded the radical reform of the international financial institutions, and like, like World Bank, ADB, and the other, like, other IMFs, like, there should be a reform. So we demanded adopt the policy, publicly funded universal health coverage, with a special focus on uh, marginalized communities. Uh, and also, we call for the state to respect and protect fundamental freedoms, especially freedom by association and freedom by expressions. Most of the Asia countries, suffering, like, civic space issues. So we demanded, like, pull up civic space, and states should protect civic space. Of course, I already shared this, and take educate measure up to protect the women and persons with disabilities and indigenous communities. Uh, so these are demanded, and there's like, more, like, this climate justice, like, for the save the life for the planet and the people. So there are many, demanded, of course, this morning, like, highlighted by our previous speaker. So I don't want to read this the detailed demand. So in the finally, that like, people assembly in the Asia region is being very powerful, in, like, where mostly we engaging, like, some countries, but I want to urge and encourage everyone to let's utilize this, tools, technique, because we have a, like, if you visit the GCAP website, we have a, like, toolkit how to, organize the people assembly in the communities. So we can, organize in a different level of people assembly and different way and different modality. You can utilize these tools, and to raise the voices of the voiceless, in, like, and to advocate in a different way, not only, like, UN building or in front of the UN building. We have to go there in the community. So I believe always in, like, is Amitabh, and again I want to believe in the how we can, mobilize the people in the real ground, and how we can change in the country level. It's very important to influence our diplomats, to influence our parliament member, to influence our, government or bureaucracy. So I want to stop here. So thank you very much for giving opportunity. So I want to stop here. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so okay, very good. So yeah, thank you for this impressions from Asia. Let's move to Africa. So we have Aminata Bari Touré from Mali, coordinating the anti-poverty coalition in Mali, and also working for women's rights. And Aminata she has a long
history of work for debt justice as one of her priority areas, and she is also the co-chair of GCAP globally. And she will speak in French, and she will speak together with Nuru Maru, the GCAP Africa coordinator, who is an advocate in Tanzania, human rights activist, yeah, and recently became the new Africa coordinator. Please, can you come here? Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour tout le monde. On dit ne laissez personne de côté, mais je crois on continue à vivre le problème de français. Partout dans les grandes réunions, on ne parle que l'anglais et les autres langues. Donc, il y a toujours la discrimination. Et il faut que ça change. Donc, merci bien, merci à tout le monde. Nous allons parler un peu de ce que nous avons eu à faire au niveau de notre Assemblée des peuples d'Afrique. Et le sommet qui est en train de s'organiser, on sait que c'est suite à des promesses. Il y a l'agenda 2030 et il y a d'autres agendas sur lesquels les Nations Unies se sont engagées. Et nos responsables aussi au niveau de nos pays sont engagés. Malheureusement, on voit qu'il n'y a pas du tout de succès. Et l'agenda 2030, nous sommes qu'à un pas, parce que 2030, c'est bientôt. Et bientôt 2025, et il reste qu'environ 5 années. Donc, 5 années, c'est comme un jour. Ce qu'on n'a pas pu faire depuis combien d'années, on ne pourra pas le faire aujourd'hui. Donc, c'est bien que nous continuions à mettre la pression sur les Nations Unies, parce que c'est là que se trouvent tous les pays. Et c'est pourquoi le 17 septembre dernier, nous avons fait une grande réunion. C'était en ligne, aussi bien en présentiel. Il y avait beaucoup de participants. Et ce qui est ressorti, c'est que nous, les représentants de la société civile africaine réunis à l'Assemblée des peuples, affirmons notre engagement à construire l'avenir de l'Afrique, fondé sur les valeurs de la justice, d'inclusivité et de durabilité. Parce que c'est des valeurs reconnues et acceptées de chacun. Mais face à ces défis, nous avons fait un appel. Et dans cet appel, nous avons d'abord, au niveau de la justice économique, ce que nous demandons, c'est l'enlacement de la dette et le système financier équitable. Donc, nous demandons l'enlacement immédiat des dettes insoutenables qui pèsent de manière disproportionnée sur les nations africaines et qui détournent les ressources essentielles aux services de santé, de l'éducation, et nous appelons à la transformation même de l'architecture financière internationale qui ne garantit pas du tout l'équité. Et donc, nous souhaitons l'équité dans la restructuration de la dette et la mise en place des mécanismes de traitement de la dette d'une manière transparente et accessible. Je fais la traduction. Donc, nous demandons aussi, comme tout le monde sait, la dette aujourd'hui, ça asphyxie. C'est en train d'asphyxier nos États. D'abord, on n'a pas assez de ressources et aujourd'hui, avec le paiement de la dette injuste, la société vit très mal. Donc, le problème d'accès aux services sociaux de base, c'est un problème. Le problème d'infrastructure aussi est là. Le deuxième point, c'est la réforme de l'architecture financière internationale. La voix de l'Afrique doit être amplifiée dans le système financier mondial. Nous appelons à la démocratisation des institutions financières internationales, y compris le Fonds monétaire internationale et la Banque mondiale pour assurer une représentation équitable des nations africaines dans le processus de décision. La révision des droits de vote et de représentation. Là, nous demandons une révision, une redistribution des droits de vote au sein des institutions financières internationales, reflétant le véritable poids économique et social des pays africains. Cela devait conduire à l'établissement d'une structure de gouvernance juste et inclusive où le Sud global a une représentation et un pouvoir de décision. Quand on regarde au niveau de la sécurité, l'Afrique n'est pas représentée. Et l'Afrique n'a pas la place dans toutes ces institutions. Il faut avoir un pouvoir équitable, une gestion équitable du pouvoir, une bonne redistribution. Aussi des mécanismes équitables de traitement de la dette. Nous appelons à la création de mécanismes transparents, indépendants, équitables de traitement de la dette qui ne seront pas dominés par les créanciers. Que ce ne soit pas la main qui donne, qui continue à aussi s'imposer. Ces mécanismes doivent prendre en compte les vulnérabilités économiques, sociales et climatiques de nos pays. Au niveau de la réforme des pratiques de prêt, les pratiques de prêt actuelles imposent souvent des conditionnalités injustes qui entravent le développement de l'Afrique. Nous plaidons pour la fin de ces conditionnalités punitives qui minent la souveraineté nationale, le développement économique. Les institutions financières doivent plutôt mettre en œuvre des pratiques de prêt qui priorisent les droits humains, le développement et l'action climatique, garantissant que les prêts servent les intérêts des peuples. Que ce ne soit pas des prêts imposés, parce que nous voyons, il y a même quelques mois, par rapport à l'énergie au niveau du Mali, le Fonds monétaire devait faciliter l'accès à un prêt, mais il y a eu des conditionnalités et le Mali a refusé. Donc nous souhaitons qu'on ait notre souveraineté et aussi notre autodétermination par rapport à tout ce qui se fait. La justice fiscale et les fuites des capitaux. Nous demandons des mesures contre les flux financiers illicites, y compris la fuite des capitaux, l'invasion fiscale, l'évitement fiscal par les multinationales. Cela inclut la création d'accords internationaux obligeant les entreprises à payer équitablement leurs impôts dans les pays où ils opèrent. Et ainsi, ça va stopper l'hémorragie des ressources. Quand on voit tout ce qu'on a comme ressources en matière de mines et au niveau de l'agriculture et que nous continuons à souffrir certains problèmes. C'est-à-dire, il y a des... Hein? Je suis trop vite. D'accord, d'accord. 5 minutes, j'ai dépassé 5 minutes. D'accord. Au niveau de la fiscalité, je voulais être fidèle à ce qu'on a dit. Au niveau de la fiscalité progressive et responsabilité des entreprises, nous plaidons pour des systèmes fiscaux qui soient répartis équitablement. Et au niveau de la justice sociale, c'est l'avenir de l'Afrique qui doit être inclusif pour tous, et pour tous les groupes marginalisés, en particulier les personnes vivant avec un handicap. Et il y a aussi des personnes qui ont des handicaps très vulnérables. Donc, on doit penser à ceci. Aussi, la justice climatique. Le Nord doit respecter les engagements en matière de financement du climat. Ils ont promis un pourcentage qui aujourd'hui n'est pas là et nous vivons aujourd'hui les inondations et beaucoup de problèmes par rapport au changement climatique. Et l'autonomisation des communautés locales. L'action climatique doit prioriser l'autonomisation locale, nationale et aussi africaine. Aussi faire la promotion des énergies renouvelables. La gouvernance mondiale, l'Afrique doit jouer un rôle. Et nous pensons que s'il y a une gouvernance équitable, chacun doit jouer son rôle. Parce que quand on regarde les Nations Unies, c'est tous les pays et c'est des engagements. Et là, chacun doit pouvoir, chaque État doit pouvoir avoir ses priorités prises en compte et que les décisions soient d'une manière transparente, inclusive et responsable. Qu'on n'écarte pas un pays ou bien une nation pour favoriser d'autres. Et maintenant, c'est le pacte pour l'avenir. Et nous pensons que ce nouveau pacte, il doit prendre des décisions qui reflètent vraiment les aspirations de tout le continent en matière de justice économique, sociale et climatique. Ce pacte doit inclure des mécanismes pour protéger les intérêts des Africains, promouvoir le développement durable et garantir une distribution équitable. Et l'Afrique ne sera pas isolée, l'Afrique serait dans ce monde, le monde que nous voulons, où personne ne serait de côté. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Madam Aminata. So my name is Nuru and I'm the African Regional Coordinator and from Tanzania. So I will make a summary of what Madam Aminata has said. So for September mobilization in Africa, it started with a national mobilization and people's assembly, including physical and online meeting. But also on 17th September, we had a regional meeting with the participation of more than 100 CSO across the continent, and we came with a declaration calling for African leaders, government, civil society organization, and the global stakeholders to champion for the African interest and shape a just and sustainable future for all. So number one, the call was on economic justice, whereby we African, we have been calling for fair financial system, to demand immediate cancellation of unsustainable debts and that disproportionately burden African nations. And most of the resources now are going to debt instead of investing on the social services like education, like health, like going to address the issues of inequalities, also being streaming down to people with disabilities, women and children. So that's a problem. And the second also was on financial architectures. The African voice, we amplify in the global financial system and the call for democratization of international financial institutions, including the IFM and the World Bank, to ensure equal representation of African in decision making, so as African can talk for themselves, nothing for us without us. And also on the same, we also demand the voting of rights and representation, fair debt workout mechanism, that we need independent, transparent, and fair debt workout mechanism that are not dominated by creditors, but also it should include us. Also, we need tax justice and capital flights, demanding for actions against illicit financial flows, which are affecting African and actually and widening the inequality gap. And also, we need a progressive taxation and corporate accountability, and advocate for taxation systems that are fair and that distribute the tax burden, ensuring multinational corporation contribute equitably and prevent tax avoidance. And on social justice, we also African future, we really demand inclusive of all marginalized group, particularly people with disabilities who face inequal barriers in accessing economic, social, and education opportunities. We also need a space, because without civic space, we cannot do this. So we demand protection of civic space across the continent, ensuring civil society can operate freely, effectively, and call for increase of social investment. And last and most importantly, on climate justice, we really need the global north um, global north should honor its commitment to climate financing, providing clear timeline, amounts, and the nature of funds, and not loans. We don't need loans because the environment is being distracted by the global north, and then the impact all over the continent. Also, we need to empower local communities so as they can prioritize local empowerment, to prioritize the local empowerment, ensuring that African communities are forefront and clean energy, forefront of the clean energy project and benefit directly from investment in renewable energies. And then on global governance and African role, now we need to reform of the multilateral system, and Africa should play a central role in shaping global governance, particularly the reform of multilateral institutions. And we call for the transparent, inclusive, and accountable global system that prioritize the development nation. So we as African, we are united and in pursuit of the just, inclusive, and sustainable future. And we call for all stakeholders to honor their commitment, reform, and justice system, and support the African path towards economic sovereignty, social equity, and environmental resilience. And together, we believe we build an Africa that thrives in diversity and leads to the global call to justice. So that is what she said, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Aminata and Nuru. I'm aware we are running late, but so we are trying to close soon. But it's also important to have the full picture. So we will have a very short report from Latin America and Caribbean. So Pamela Ogando, she's a gender specialist and working on climate justice, working with Dominican feminist organization and representing GCAP Latin America now. Please.
Thank you, Ingo. I'm gonna make it short. I'm sorry, we're running late. I came here representing GCAP members organization from Latin America and the Caribbean, and we gathered together last week in a time where growing inequalities and setbacks we're facing as a region. We are witnessing a deepening of poverty, increased social and environmental crisis and injustices, widening economic gaps, and the impacts of unsustainable debt burdens. And the rights of women and minorities are all under constant threat. This year, our assembly makes an urgent call to governments and decision makers to confront these injustices. In the coming years, important multilateral meetings are going to be held in Latin America, such as the G20 in Brazil and the COP30 in the Amazon will take place. And it's critical that we advocate for governance that prioritize human rights and fights inequality, poverty, and devastating impacts of debt. Our demands are structured around 4 pillars. I'm going to make it short. Economic justice. We demand a radical transformation of economic system to ensure fairness. Tax system must be designed to reduce poverty, and governments should stop promoting extractivist models through incentive that harms our environments. Climate justice. We call for concrete actions to combat the climate crisis we are facing, aligning with the Paris Agreement, designing plans for resilience and loss and recovery, and ensuring that the voices of marginalized groups, especially women, are included in climate solutions. Additionally, there must be a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, along with financial transfer from the global north to address the climate debt. Social justice. Governments must ensure equal access to essential services and protect civil society's role in defending human rights. Quality education, equitable healthcare, and safe working conditions are essential for us to achieving well-being for all. Gender justice. Women must have access to free, quality reproductive health services, and comprehensive sexuality education must be promoted. Resources must be allocated to find gender violence, and women should be empowered to participate in peace building efforts. Lastly, we call on governments, international organizations, and us as civil society to act with urgency and coherence to realize these demands. We believe that we can create a future where justice and equality will prevail for all. Thank you so much.
Okay, so thank you very much. It was, I think, this give additional picture from just a short overview of demands coming from the different countries around the world. We will hear more about this the coming days in the different sessions. So we will have actually in 20 minutes it's a session on climate finance here. Today all the sessions will be here in this room. Tomorrow all sessions will be also here in this room, and on Tuesday the sessions will be on the 8th floor. So unlike last year, we don't have parallel sessions, so it's possible to to be basically in all the sessions if you can and if you are interested. So just I think we are showing the program, but we have also the online links. The next session is then on inequalities and leave no one behind at 1:30. So at 1 we will have lunch here. Today the church center closes at 3, so therefore we cannot continue today, but tomorrow we will have several sessions starting with FFD4 conference in the morning at 9, then at 11 on the World Social Summit, the preparations, and then we will have the session on civic space, democracy at after lunch. I think probably it's at 1, if I remember right. Then we will have a feminist session at 3 tomorrow. We will have then a session on peace and conflicts and wars afterwards. This is, I think, at 5. There will be a solidarity action here at the end tomorrow. So all of you are invited to be part of it. On Tuesday, we have we start with the youth and intergenerational session at 9 in the morning. Then we will have a session at 11 on the different processes, also coming from the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future, but also FFD4, what is planned actually for next year, also Beijing plus 30. There will be also the World Social Summit process, the COPs. So we will exchange on that. That's in the morning, and then after lunch, basically at 1, we will start on the plan for mobilization for next year. So we have the whole afternoon, so it's quite long time, but it's also good to have sometimes a bit more time to work together. So we will basically, those are 2 parts. One is more to discuss on the narrative, so what could be the main messages of mobilization, the other more on how to mobilize. So this is a big opportunity to do this together here in the room, not only online. But of course, not all people are here, so there are different processes online and also in other meetings to plan for this. But this is one big opportunity, and I really would like to invite you to participate in that. Now, just before closing, we want to show the 52 co-organizers. Basically, it would be really great if we could present each of them, but unfortunately, the time is a bit short. So it's not working, so I don't know them by heart. I could probably mention many of you, but then if I start doing this, then I will forget all. I don't know all 52. So, sorry? We will show the list later on. So, but definitely, I want really to say again, thank you to all the co-organizers for doing this together. As GCAP was mentioned a few times, so we really want to make this as something together, and it's to enable this cooperation and also to have the visibility of all of the co-organizers. And so big thanks to everybody. And you will see most of the co-organizers are actually organizers of the session, so that will be much more visible then. So what time do we have now? We have. So Bina will do the closing now, and then we will have a short break of 10-15 minutes to start the new session.
The next session is starting at 1:30, you said?
No. The next session is scheduled to start at 11:30. So we will probably start a few minutes late, but so this is the one on climate financing. I think a very interesting and good session, like the others also, which will follow. So please, we will have a break of 10-15 minutes in between.
Thank you, Ingo. And don't go anywhere. We have some really sumptuous lunch for you after that. So please wait and enjoy that. Well, I don't think we can end the session without some slogans. Do you agree? Okay. So you with me now? Let's say the people united. What is this? All of you are so tired. The people united. The people united. Okay, there's a really good one. What do feminists look like? And you point to yourself. Is that okay? What do feminists looks like?